Welcome to the Music Mission. My name is Panagiotis Karamanos. I am a music teacher in Sydney, Australia, as well as the conductor and director of the Modest Orchestra, an orchestra consisting of passionate professional musicians that prioritizes the education and enjoyment of music through the performance of staple works and new compositions. All recordings you hear, including this background music, come from our public performances, which you can find on YouTube if you search up Modest Orchestra. This podcast is designed for all lovers of music, no matter your musical preference, experience, or expertise. Now on to today's episode. Hi, and welcome to this week's podcast. It's 7:50 in the PM on a Sunday afternoon. I've had a very intense week. On Friday evening, after a full day of being at a Kadai workshop from 9 till 4 p.m. at Penrith, I then went to a rehearsal in Strathfield, played trumpet from 6 p.m. until 9:30. The next day, on Saturday, which was yesterday, I took a conducting seminar, workshop, which was very fun. I took a workshop on arranging and conducting. It was the music education camp at the Sydney Conservatorium, organised by Connor Milanos. It was a fun workshop. This is the second time I've done that. The first time was highly focused on conducting. This time it was just focused mostly on arranging and incorporating that in. But that's not today. That's not for today's topic. That'll be probably for next week. After that, what did I do? I went home, and today I just came back from. Let me look at my notes here. From the 2020 New Trumpet Syllabus Workshop. So the AMEB have created a new syllabus for the trumpet, and I've just come back from that, and I thought I'd just give a bit on my thoughts on the new syllabus. So without further ado, let's begin. And I think it's also worth noting that I'm also running on 4 hours of sleep, so please forgive my tone, and let's just dive straight into it. So a few things have changed in the trumpet syllabus. The main thing is that they've streamlined everything, which is quite good. They've made it easier for trumpet teachers to know what to do. They made it easier for students to understand what's required. They've kind of unified a lot of things, especially particularly the technical work, scales, arpeggios, double tonguing, triple tonguing. Makes a lot more sense now, which is great. But one thing that has me a little bit confused is, there's two things that have me confused. One is the difficulty of the repertoire from grade preliminary to grade 4, and the second is the inclusion of the preliminary grade, because before trumpet only had grade 1, and they've gone for the model of, I guess, other instruments like violin and piano, for example, which have a preliminary grade, and then you begin your grade 1 exam. And so they've introduced that into trumpet, which is really cool, which is great. So now we have an option for students who are not quite at grade 1 level, but want to have that experience of, preparing a piece for an exam. They have the opportunity to, okay, I'm going to prepare my C major, my chromatic, and my arpeggio, and I'm going to prepare 3 pieces, and I'm going to walk in, and it's going to be great. I'm not grade 1 level, but here I go. Here's the problem. It's harder. The preliminary grade now is harder than the previous grade 1, at least at first glance. I'm yet to completely dive in. This is my initial reaction. So, yeah, it's just kind of like a reaction to the workshop today. I'm going to interview another trumpeter in a couple of weeks, and we're going to dive into it in more depth, and we're going to do a lot more research. But this is kind of like my first impressions. And my first impression is that the preliminary seems harder than the previous grade 1. So as a result, the aim of trying to get students who aren't at grade 1 to come has now, the opposite effects happened. You've kind of made it harder. And so I'm not quite sure. My hunch is along the line, I think there's a break between grade 4 and grade 5, in that the jump between those two is too hard. And so in order to close the gap between grade 4, anything below, and grade 5, anything above, they've probably attempted to raise the difficulty. just to catch up, to make the gap less of a jump. And with the inclusion of preliminary, that was meant to negate that, but I don't think that's quite negated that effect yet. So I guess in their attempt to try and raise the bar, they've had to create a new level below grade 1 that either is the same entry point as it was before or is potentially easier. And the problem is it seems to be harder than the previous grade 1. So I guess preliminary, the whole point of preliminary was always that I'm a bit too young, or I'm a bit too much of a novice, or I'm still in the beginning, or whatever you want to say. And grade 1's a bit too hard for me. I need just an entry point. And so that's the whole point of preliminary. But they've made it harder. So all of a sudden, instead of just having mostly crotchets in scalic, in phrases with scalic movement and, lots of slurs and accents, all of a sudden we've got more nuanced music that is in more difficult keys than what we had before, with quavers, staccatos, slurred quavers in pairs, leading to tenuto crotchets followed by staccato. So quite advanced stuff for a preliminary grade. So it's just a little bit confusing. So yeah. And what that's also resulted in, because now all of a sudden the bottom bar has been raised so much, grade 2, the pieces that have been written are borderline grade 3, sometimes even grade 4. A lot of them were very hard. And a lot of colleagues on the day were expressing these same concerns. People that I knew from the past experiences, and people I didn't know. There was this general confusion of, wait, are the pieces harder or are they the same? Because half of them were really hard within grade 3, for example, and half of them were really easy. So from an examination perspective, how do you mark that? Are you going to give the kid who attempted the really hard grade 3 pieces, which really should be in the 5th grade repertoire list, are you going to give them more marks because the kid that did the easy grade 3 pieces really well because they're easier, do you give them the A+, or what about the kid that did the hard pieces? To counter that, you could possibly say, well, the kid who's done the harder pieces, there's other opportunities for them to do well. So in order to get an A+, they have to be able to sight read, and chances are that if they're doing the harder repertoire, then perhaps they're a better sight reader. Their oral skills might be better, or their general knowledge might be better, and that's why they're attempting the harder pieces. And you could say that, but also the opposite could be true. That kid could be very smart. A kid who's attempting the quote unquote easier pieces could be just could be doing those because they want to focus on a specific core foundation when it comes to trumpet playing, or they're just pressed for time. They've got too many assignments, so they can't afford to spend so many hours a week practicing. So it's a really hard thing for teachers and for students and for examiners. So it's a bit tricky. It's very tricky. So the new syllabus was written by Phil Ryan, who's a trumpeter from Queensland. And the interesting thing about this has been that they had a committee over there in Queensland who created it, and it was a very collaborative process, and went through a very stringent process in how they managed to just make sure everything, that there was consistency, and there is consistency. The only problem is that consistency is now significantly higher than it was before. And so perhaps they could have been basing this on a Queensland standard, for example, and without really consulting other states. And that was another thing brought up, saying, well, it seems to, everyone's talking about it at the lunch breaks and tea breaks. They're saying, well, it might be, how many people did they consult? Was it just a team of 5? So it's a bit tricky. In the end, it'll be fine. Everyone will adjust, but it's just a bit of a transition period. And I think the shocking thing is that the repertoire is that much harder. So I think we've just got to get used to the fact that maybe grade 3 is actually the old grade 4, and now there's like a grade 4.5 in between to jump to grade 5, because that's when the books stop, the little AMEB provided books. That's when you've got to kind of pick your own pieces, and it gets a bit trickier from there. You got to use the manual syllabus more. So yeah, one thing that Phil Ryan, the trumpeter who was kind of just explaining their process, did really brilliantly, and I really do. I know I've been kind of negative, and I guess it is the kind of the 4 hours of no sleep. But the big thing he said was that we really took into consideration the range of each required for each grade. So, for example, a specific range for fifth grade is like low F sharp to high A or something. And he's made sure that all the pieces fit within that range and nothing exceeds that. Because sometimes you did find in the past where it would say, oh, grade 5 only has this range, and then guess what? The pieces would exceed that, especially in grade 2, grade 3, the lower grades. The books provided by AMEB would have pieces that exceeded that. So it was a bit confusing. So it's great that they've really been very thorough in their process in making sure that all the pieces have fit within the range, and it's much better. Another thing they've done, which is very, very clever, and I think it's actually brilliant, is how they've approached List A. And for each grade, you've got to learn a set of scales. And of those scales, like you got to learn 12 scales, including arpeggios and all that stuff. And then, so there's like, 3 or 4 keys per grade, for example. He's made sure that the List A in the AMEB books actually reflect the keys, which is great. For some reason, we didn't have that before, or not to this degree. It's very thorough. So, for example, in one of the grades, I think it was grade 3, grade 2, where they did Waltzing Matilda, and it's in the key of D major, which for trumpet is not a good key. So as a result, we've now got pieces that have been written or were written being transposed to these new key signatures to fit with the scales. This is really great because it's just going to reinforce all the scalic work the kids do, because scales are great. You learn how to do E flat major and you go, okay, great, cool, I can do E flat major now, cool. Then you get a piece of music that's in E flat major, and then all of a sudden the scale makes a lot more sense. It has a real world application and a direct, immediate application, which I really, 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 really do thoroughly appreciate. And I think it's a really brilliant thing. Another thing he's done with the scales is get rid of the lists. So the set list. So you used to have let's give a random number now, 20 scales, and then you have set list A, which had 12 of those scales, and then set list B, which had a different 12, and then set list C, which had a different 12. And then it used to be that you're meant to learn all 20 scales and then pick a set list, which never happened. Everyone would say, oh, I'm just going to learn the scales in set list B. So because that was what the data was showing, people were just, as most people would, not putting the extra effort to learn all the scales required for the grade and just learn the ones in the set list, the subset list of the big overall master list. So they've scrapped away with that. And now there's just one set list for each grade, which I think is great. It just gets rid of all the confusion. There's less scales, but there is now a very clear progression that everyone will go through these scales up to grade 8. And so there's no longer the possibility, like there was in the past, where you could actually technically avoid certain scales, not completely, but almost entirely, all the way up to grade 8 by being really strategic with your set lists. And so you can avoid the harder scales. For example, I think, as Andrew Evans once said, the hardest scale is A flat harmonic minor and melodic minor on the trumpet. Not sure why, but I like to say that as a joke now. So you have to do that in grade 7 now. Every single person has to do that. And so by the time you finish grade 8, everyone has done every single scale, which is really cool. Another thing, which hasn't been quite removed, but has been hugely fixed, was in the past, grade 7 was significantly harder than grade 8. And it was very weird. And they've gotten rid of that, especially with the double tonguing and triple tonguing. Now the double tonguing and triple tonguing actually makes sense, and it's actually easier in grade 7 and than it was in grade 8. But they've kept the tradition of, well, I guess it's a trumpet tradition, which is that, I lost my train of thought for a second. Oh yeah, the scales are technically slightly higher. So what I'm going to do is actually read the list of scales. So in grade 7, now, this is what every single person has to do. B major 2 octaves, B major arpeggio, G sharp harmonic, G sharp melodic, G sharp minor arpeggio, F sharp major arpeggio. So basically the arpeggio of every single equivalent. D sharp harmonic, D sharp melodic, B flat major, G harmonic minor, G melodic minor, D flat major, B flat harmonic, and B flat melodic. So those are the scales, and lots of flats and lots of sharps. Now if we turn the pages to grade 8, they're the same, if not slightly easier. So we have D major now instead of B major, which on trumpet is a lot easier to do. B harmonic instead of G sharp harmonic. We have E major instead of F sharp major. We have C sharp harmonic instead of D sharp harmonic. C sharp major scale instead of B flat, so that's the harder one. And F major instead of D flat major, as well as D harmonic minor instead of B flat harmonic minor. So there are scales in grade 8 which are definitely easier, and there are some which are definitely harder, but the difficulty, like how much harder they are compared to grade 7, is not that much, because also by this stage you've got to take into consideration they're better musicians, so actually it's easier in a weird way. I was about to say something. That's right. Yeah, so that's the scales and arpeggios, and they got rid of the horrible triple tonguing in grade 8, which was an arpeggio going da 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 da, and now it's just a scalic da 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 da, because in grade 7 you have da 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 da. You had repeated notes for the triple tonguing, and the jump from grade 7 to grade 8 was, okay, now you can do arpeggios on those notes, despite the fact that we only wanted you to do repeated notes. So the progression is a lot better. Same thing with double tonguing. And they've now, in the technical book, in the exact same book, so one purchase, you buy all the scales, which, you know, every kid does. You get all of the excerpts that required throughout your AMEB journey, which is amazing beyond belief, because you'd have the kids, you know, in the beginning years, buy the scale and the scale booklet, and then they would have to, at some stage, buy excerpts. And there's a separate book, and then there's another thing to lose, and another thing to bring to each lesson. It's like, oh, sorry, I forgot it this week. But now they've integrated it into one. So throughout their entire trumpet journey, they're using this one book, which I think it really streamlines things. And they've created another new book called the Sight Reading and Transposing Book, written by Brendan Collins. He's a trombonist, composer, and he's one like the seat. He's just a great guy. What I'll do actually is read his little profile. So his profile at the beginning of the book says, Australian composer and performer Brendan Collins is currently the chief brass examiner for AMEB and the composer in residence at Barker College. His compositions are frequently performed and recorded throughout the world by many leading international artists and regularly broadcast on ABC Classic FM. And he's written this great little book that goes from preliminary all the way to 8th grade, which includes, so preliminary's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, has got 15 sight reading exercises. Grade 1 has got 12 sight reading exercises. Grade 2 has got 12, and they're all different. Like one's a waltz, one's at moderate speed. Grade 3, they got 12, and they get harder in sequence, which is great. Generally, the way they've structured it, which is really brilliant, all the stuff learnt in grade 2, for example, becomes the sight reading material for grade 3, and it just keeps going up the chain, which makes a lot of sense because, you know, you've conquered that grade, and now you can move on to the next. In grade 3, that's when transposition is introduced. So he's got 8 exercises for trumpet in C, so you've got to play upper tone. And they seem to be at the preliminary scale. So perhaps grade 3 is grade 1. Grade 4 looks like, so grade 3 was preliminary, grade 4 is grade 1. Grade 5, transposition, let's have a look at it, is grade 2, and that's the progression there. One thing they haven't, which is a bit vague on, is where are we transposing from? Because in his book, he's just got everything in C major. So if everything's written in C major, you've now got to transpose it to trumpet in D. So If you're on a B flat trumpet, you got to go up a third and change the key signature. So to trumpet, so you got to play an E major all of a sudden. If you're playing trumpet in C, you've got to take an upper tone and change it to trumpet, and you got to play everything in D major. He hasn't mentioned if. No one really asked this question. I didn't really think about it until on the way home. What are the other possibilities? Like, could a piece be written in F, or will everything just have accidentals? Because based on his book, it seems that all the transposition is just in the key of C, no matter what you're transposing to. So trumpet in A, trumpet in F, trumpet in C, trumpet in D, trumpet in E, flat E, natural. Ooh. That's not fun if you're in a B flat trumpet. That's up an augmented fourth. It seems to all be in C major, and there's no key signature, which it makes it easy, but also makes it harder, because in the real world, when you are transposing, you're constantly dealing with key signatures. So it would be nice if there was a way to actually, say that, okay, you're going to transpose to C upper tone from these possible key signatures. So for example, okay, you're going to do F major, so you're going to change it to G, and here's B flat, you're going to change it to C, and here's F sharp, you've got to change it to, guess what, A flat or G sharp, depending on the context. So little things like that. But then again, this has been a Herculean task. So to ask them to do that is maybe asking a bit much, because this is literally the very first book. So there's not much complaining there. It's a phenomenal resource, and I'm definitely going to use this so much with all of my students. So I think I've gone through basically everything that was important on the day. I'm just going to check my iPad notes. So here's my iPad, and it's an iPad Pro 9.7 inch 2016 model. It has Apple Pencil support. It's very nice. I've been using it since 2016 because I got it literally 2 weeks after it was released. And I love this little thing. It's a very good little iPad. Anyone out there who hasn't got an iPad, I highly recommend. It literally changes your life as a musician and as a teacher. All right, so here we go. Trumpet workshop. Preliminary grade, list A. Okay, so basically the main thing I've written down is that the main change on a fundamental level has been list A, and just the approach in terms of key signatures. List B and C, they've just upped the difficulty, it seems. I've got another note here that says preliminary grade 1 equals orchestral brass grade 1, not the normal grade 1. So there's a lot of confusion, because there's like different types of orchestral playing. Different types of AMEB books that are out there. But the idea is that this replaces the gold books. This basically replaces everything. So this new syllabus will totally take over in 3 years' time. So for the next 2 years, you can either opt in to use the new 2020 syllabus or the previous syllabus to that, anything 2019 and before. So that gives teachers at least a time to wrap their heads around it, figure out because this is a new syllabus, how do the ATAR bonus points work, which I'm not entirely too sure of. I'm just going to have to ask a few people who've dealt with this, because I haven't had any students that go through HSC and AMEB at the same time. So, and there's bonus points for that, which is really cool. So yeah, I've been rambling on now for about 23 minutes, it says here. So I think I might end it very soon by saying it was a very fun day. I got to be a guinea pig for the sight reading book. I went up and I had to sight read a grade 5 piece, grade 5 level sight reading, which was a grade 4 level piece. You'd be surprised how stressful that is, actually, in front of a room full of, because I'm young, full of people who are much older than me, more experienced than me, and Brendan Collins goes, "Who has a trumpet?" And I'm literally the only one. I said, "I'll do it, I guess." And then in front of everyone, I had to read this piece in 6/8, and there were dotted quavers followed by 3 semiquavers, then all these awkward intervals. But I did good. I did well, I think. So my teacher would be proud. So yeah, that's the new 2020 syllabus in a nutshell. Will it change anything? No, not really. Once we learn to recalibrate ourselves, I think. Unfortunately, it does seem the barrier, the entry level has been raised, but that's just something we have to deal with. And there's going to be such a huge outroar in the community, I can tell. I mean, I'm trying to keep as objective as possible, and I think I've come off in this podcast perhaps as a bit too negative. Did I bash on it? I don't think so. I did express some concerns, but I think those concerns are justified based on what we had before. But then again, that's not to say that these concerns outweigh the good that's been done. I think the good that's been done was actually amazing. It was really needed just to unify everything. It's just cleaned up. It's kind of like that time. It's kind of like when you have a really, really messy, cluttered desk or a desktop on your computer, and you say to yourself, right, fine, I'm going to put everything in nice, neat piles and say, this is where the pens go, this is where the documents go, this is where the PDFs go, this is where the paper clips go. And once everything's been compartmentalized, you now say, okay, right, do we need this? Hang on a second. I don't really need a Bulldog clip to clip 500 pages in one hit. So I'm going to get rid of this. And like, oh, this is a bit too small, this is a bit too big. And so then not only did you compartmentalize it better, you also reduced it to what's actually needed. So they've streamlined the whole syllabus, and I think it's a great thing. So with that, I'm going to end the podcast and say, I know this second podcast was meant to have a guest, but in the busy life of Panagiotis Karamanos, it's very hard to even catch a second to myself, let alone with others. So that's going to be tricky. This week I've got rehearsals basically every single day, plus work. So it's going to be a very hectic day indeed. However, I just realized I get to conduct a choir on Tuesday, so that'll be exciting. So I might have a podcast about that. But in the meantime, I want you to keep listening to as much music as possible. Keep an open mind, and no matter what, always remember that there's more to learn, and that every single person's opinion, no matter who they are, how young or how old they are, is important, because that opinion has come from somewhere. And I do really think I need to find a way to end these podcasts like a catchy catchphrase rather than this. But that's what's going to be for this week. So until next time, keep making music. Okay, bye.